So Antony Blinken, our amazing, wonderful U.S. Secretary of State, performed Rockin' in the Free World at Barman Dictat, a bar in Kiev, just a few hours ago. Now, this event occurred during a critical time as Blinken was in Ukraine to affirm U.S. support amidst the ongoing conflict with Russia. His performance, intended as a gesture of solidarity, instead sparked controversy and divided opinions among Ukrainians and observers. While some viewed it as a heartfelt expression of support, many others criticized it as inappropriate given the severity of the ongoing war. Now, not only was this performance cringe, it was also quite ill-timed, as just hours after the performance, the announcement came that, once again, Ukraine was suspending elections, leaving their citizens deprived of the rights to choose who leads them. And what do you suppose the government's excuse this time was? Well, same as always. Due to the ongoing martial law in the country, which has been in effect since the Russian invasion back in February of 2022, Ukraine's constitution prohibits the holding of elections during said inaction of martial law. This means that, once more, there will be the postponement of the presidential and parliamentary elections scheduled for 2024. The government is continuing to defend their decision, citing severe security concerns and logistical challenges posed by the ongoing war. So let's talk about the public and political reactions to all of this. To do this, we're going to pull up an article from The Hill. This is titled, Blinken Gets Blowback Over Rockin' in the Free World Performance in Kiev. This is written by Miranda Nazaro. She writes, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is facing backlash over his musical performance at a bar in Kiev, with some arguing that it was inappropriate given Ukraine's ongoing war against Russia. Blinken, during the surprise visit Tuesday, performed a cover of Rockin' in the Free World by Neil Young with a band at the Barman Dictat, a well-known cocktail basement bar. Upon getting up on stage with the Ukrainian band 1999, the crowd erupted in cheers and Blinken said, Your soldiers, your citizens, particularly in the Northeast in Kharkiv, are suffering tremendously. But they need to know, you need to know, the United States is with you. So much of the world is with you, and they're fighting not just for a free Ukraine, but for the free world, and the free world is with you too. Now, some Ukrainians, however, criticized the top U.S. diplomat for what they thought was poor judgment, given Russia's most recent advancements into northwestern Ukraine. Svetlana Matvienko, the head of the Agency for Legislative Initiatives, an NGO, said this. She said one word is enough to describe U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's evening in Kiev yesterday: inappropriate. Kharkiv region is being wiped from the earth. People are leaving their homes. Kharkiv is under strike from air bombs. Sumy region is preparing, and a U.S. top official is singing songs in a Kiev bar. And then you have a Ukrainian veteran who lost both his legs in combat, calling the performance as inappropriate as possible. Now, I would also be remiss if I didn't point something else out. The choice of song here is, well, to put it nicely, poor. If you examine the lyrics and the context in which it was written, it reveals a deeply critical view of American society, particularly its capitalist aspects. I'll give you one example. The lyrics mention, quote, 1,000 points of light for the homeless man, end quote, which is essentially mocking political slogans that promise much but deliver so little in terms of real change or improvement in the lives of the disadvantaged. Now, what this reminds me of is the incompetent rube, otherwise known as former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and James Taylor in Paris following the Charlie Hebdo attacks in January of 2015. The event that I'm referring to was intended as a gesture of solidarity with France following the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack, which had resulted in many deaths and had deeply shaken the nation. The performance was seen as embodying a kind of cultural insensitivity or misunderstanding, when in reality it was just an idiot making a poor choice. Normally, you would expect to see a more subdued or direct expression of solidarity. And instead they got this song. And so the French media and their public were puzzled by the American approach, which included Kerry's references to giving a big hug to Paris, a phrase that lost all of its intended warmth when literally translated and communicated to the French audience. The use of a popular American song at a diplomatic event related to terrorism was perceived by many as trivializing the serious nature of the attacks. The performance was seen as reducing a profound act of violence against the French people and national trauma to a level that could be consoled to a simple musical number, which seemed to undermine the depth of French grief. Now, the entire event, naturally, was a huge embarrassment for the U.S., and media reaction was swift and overwhelmingly negative, with many outlets outright mocking the choice of song and the overall execution of the event. Which then takes us back to the Hill article. The Ukrainian lawmaker and former diplomat Bogdan Yeremenko said that while the country is grateful for the U.S. support, the performance was poorly timed, given how long it took for Congress to pass further aid for the nation. Now, the timing of Blinken's performance amid these critical developments, the further crumbling of democratic rule, is in all reality just a distraction here, even if it is a bit amusing to watch. You see, the U.S. has given massive financial and military hardware aid to the nation, even as concerns have been mounting regarding the governance and democracy within this country. The war has undoubtedly strained Ukraine's democratic institutions, but publicly, though, Ukrainian leaders and those who provide international support, including us here in the U.S., make quite the show of emphasizing that there is an importance in Ukraine for their democracy and their human rights, even as the country has been crushing its own citizens, specifically their religious leaders. And I'm talking about the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, or the UOC, which has historical ties to the Russian Orthodox Church, or the ROC. You see, since the onset of the Russian invasion back in 2022, there has been increased scrutiny and legal action, including arrests taken against religious leaders by Ukrainian authorities. The Ukraine government cites allegations that some members of the UOC have maintained a close tie with Russia and may have engaged in activities that undermine Ukrainian sovereignty and security. So here's a couple of specific cases and examples of government action. You have the Metropolitan Pavel's house arrest. Now, Pavel, a prominent leader within the UOC, was placed under house arrest by a Ukrainian court. The charges against him included justifying Russia's aggressions and promoting interreligious enmity. Then you have Ukrainian security agencies, which have conducted numerous searches of UOC properties. These actions often result in the seizure of items like Russian passports and propaganda materials, which the authorities are citing as evidence of the church's pro-Russian activities. And finally, the criminal cases, which essentially since 2022, there have been 61 cases opened up against UOC clergy. So these are the leadership of the church, with 7 already found guilty of various charges. These cases typically relate to the accusations of glorifying the Russian invasion or maintaining illicit ties with Russian entities. Now, what this is doing is having a major impact on religious freedom in that country. Ukraine has now introduced legislation aimed at restricting religious organizations affiliated with, quote, centers of influence, end quote, in Russia. This legislation is deeply controversial and very dangerous, but it is seen by the government of Ukraine as necessary to safeguard their national security without outright banning any church. I mean, why ban the church when you can just, take out all the leaders and essentially take over? Now, there have been international and domestic reactions to this, as you can imagine. And internationally, there have been concerns about the infringement on the religious freedom, while domestically opinions are divided, with some supporting the government's actions as essential for national security, while others view them as excessive. This is a very dark turn for a country already cracking at the seams. What comes next in that part of the world will almost certainly just be more war and more death, with no end in sight. And that, my friends, will bring this episode to a close. From the To Be Frank Show, I am Adrian. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.